So I have drilled holes in the portion of my design that I'm going to cut out. So you see, this is the side with the solder. I have glued my design to the top. In my design, everything that is black is going to stay. Everything that is white is going to leave. I find it easiest to do the piercing first and then cut off the outsides so that you've got more metal to hold on to. My design is now cut out. I have gone ahead and filed the insides of these shapes. I will be able to get to the outside easily once it's soldered down, but I won't be able to get in here inside these piercings, so I've filed those. Now I'm getting ready to solder it down to my other piece of metal, but like we learned with our containers, you want to get rid of as much excess metal as possible. So I'm going to cut along the Sharpie line to get rid of the excess, but still leave myself plenty of room to put solder chips around the perimeter. This is what it looks like when I'm done sawing off the excess. Notice it is not perfect. Do not spend your time trying to make this perfect. You're just going to end up sawing off all this extra metal. So it's not worth the time or the energy to try to make it look great. See? It's okay. Now I need to anneal the bottom piece. Okay, to show you how to anneal silver, I want to show you in the dark just because it doesn't look annealed when the light's on, and you have to be very careful, otherwise you could melt your silver, and we don't want that. So you do the same thing as always, and you're looking for the orange flame. I'm going to show you with the light off though. Mesmerizing with the light off. Okay, so you see that orange flame? That's annealed. See that? Okay, flip the light on. But it doesn't look like that with the light on. You really have to pay attention to your flame and look for that orange flame. See, that's done. And then take it off as soon as the flame is orange so that you don't risk melting it. Here I am with my cut out top piece and my bottom piece that has most of the excess cut off. And I'll remind you that my top piece has hard solder that had previously been flowed onto it before I cut it out. So now it's time to really solder these two things together. But first, I need to set up my soldering area. Now, this setup here is what we're used to seeing with the brake. But I am going to need to heat this mostly from underneath to get the solder on the top to flow down to the bottom. And I'm just not going to be able to get enough heat here. So take the brick out. You don't have to keep this on the turntable if you don't want to, but I think it's pretty convenient. Let me move this where it's in here. We're going to use this. This is called a tripod. Nestle it down in there. This is just a steel 3-legged tripod with a screen on it, and this is going to allow me to get the torch right up in here, so I can put my piece on here, heat from underneath and from up top. The downside to this is that it does not insulate. It doesn't hold in the heat like a brick does. So we're gonna need a lot more heat. We're gonna have to upgrade to a bigger torch. To change the torch tip, since this is what's called a Smith torch, you unscrew here and you just pull it off. Make sure it's closed. Let's see, that was a number 1. I'm gonna go up to a number 3. So you put it back on, you just stick it in, push it down, tighten the collar, and there you have it. Changed it out. So we need to flux our piece. With silver, some people find it helpful to put flux over the entire piece because there is something called fire stain that affects silver. So fire scale is just the black oxidation that appears when you heat something. All metals get it. But silver also gets this stuff called fire stain, which are little purple stains that appear after you've filed and sanded. And then you have to go back and file and sand them off, and it's a pain. But there is some evidence that fluxing the entire piece kind of helps keep that from forming. So, I mean, it doesn't hurt anything. So, now this part's very important. We need to have a good meetup between the top and bottom pieces. So what I'm going to do after I've fluxed is just ever so slightly bend this into like a slightly satisfied smile. See that? It's just ever so slightly bent. And that's really going to help make sure the pieces are touching. Now comes the tedious part that everybody hates, putting on the solder chips. So I'm going to try and, there we go. Try and center your piece as best you can. I'm still using hard solder. So there's the solder blobs on the underside are hard, but I'm still doing the first joint on this piece of metal. So I'm still using hard solder. Take your time, line up your solder all the way around the outside, just like we did with our containers and our bezels. If you haven't left yourself enough room for the solder chips, this will be extra infuriating. But this is the most time-consuming part of soldering, so you got to get it right. And then if your flux dries out on you, just put some more flux on, because if the flux dries out, then the solder chips don't stick, and that's really frustrating. I've got solder chips all the way around. See that? Kind of like stitching again. Now comes the soldering. You do not have to put the tripod on the turntable. You can move the turntable and just have the tripod there. But what you need to practice is switching the torch from underneath to up. So turn it in a way, you're going to spend a lot of your time under here. So adjust it in a way where you can reach it easily, but then practice quickly going back up to the top. Practice this move, because you're going to need, once you put the heat on it, you cannot take the heat back off. So when it's time to switch back up to the top, you're going to need to go quickly. So practice this move. get comfortable with it. I have my solder poker nearby in case I need to adjust any solder chips. As you can see, this is a big torch with a lot of heat. So first, I preheat again to try to keep the flux from boiling off of my solder chips. I've spent a lot of time putting them on there, and I really don't want them to fly off. I've also got some copper tongs here nearby in case I need to adjust my heat settings. Now that the flux is mostly dried out, I see a few chips moving here and there. Now is the time that I'm going to adjust them. You have to have the heat on them to adjust them. So hit it with the heat a little bit. Some of them went pretty far under there. Not great. Oh no! Yeah. Okay. Just going to adjust this back to where it goes, and since my solder has not been very fine, I'm going to have to do some pressing with my tongue. So I heat underneath, back and forth. Once you put the heat on, do not take the heat off. Once you see one solder chip flow, that's your cue to go up to the top and focus on the seam. And there they go, they're flowing, so I'm going to come to the top. And then because I had my little problem, there it goes, you see it? Just going to press down and make sure it's making contact all the way across. Oh, it's beautiful! It's beautiful! As beautiful as it is though, you need to stop when you're done. If you keep going, you will melt it. But that looked great. Let it cool on the tripod for a minute. Silver is fragile and we don't want to shock it too much. So let it cool on the tripod, or better yet, take it off the tripod and put it somewhere else to cool down, and then you can quench it. Then we need to put this back the way we found it. So the tripod is hot now, so carefully move it out of the way and put it towards the back. When something is towards the back wall of the solder station, that communicates that it could be hot and you need to approach with caution. Put our brake back. That way it's set up for the next person. I'm back. I have soldered my ring. So this is called laminating or overlay soldering or sweat soldering. It's got several names, but I have laminated my top piece of metal to the back piece of metal. Now I need to take my saw and I need to saw all of this excess off. In this design, I can choose to leave the backing here in my openings, and then later I can patinate it or fill it with resin or enamel or something. Or right now I can choose to drill a hole and pierce out the same opening in the bottom layer as well. That's up to you. So right now, before I form it into a ring, I need to do that though, because once it's a ring, it gets really hard to saw it. So I need to cut off all the excess on the outside, and if there's any excess inside the design I want to get rid of, I need to do that right now as well. Take a minute to just marvel. You see how the seam where the top layer meets the bottom layer, there's no gaps, there's no dark lines that would indicate that it did not solder all the way. That solder goes all the way around. You see that? And even inside the design, you see I did not put any solder chips inside that design because I didn't want any blobs. But you see, because I had flowed solder on the back of the top piece, it still filled all the way around inside that design. It's just beautiful. Okay, now to saw. Note, I'm still not worrying about getting this perfect, because once it's round, I'm going to file and sand. And at that point, I will make it perfect. But we learned before that it's still faster to cut off as much excess as possible than trying to file it off. So get as close as you can, but if there are spots where it's messy, don't worry about it. And then save this silver. Do not get rid of it. You see how frequently I'm changing positions here? And that's just because every little bit I find a different way to hold it to keep my fingers out of the way. So when you're piercing, when you're sawing, you're constantly changing your positioning. Don't forget, you also need to cut off this excess here, because this top piece is exactly the right size that it needs to be. Okay, for my design, I am going to go ahead and remove the openings on this side, but I'm going to leave the chevron filled in so that I can fill it with stuff later. I've got most of my excess cut off. It's not perfect yet, and that's actually good. Ooh, I cut my finger. We're going to form this, and then we're going to solder it right here. And we actually kind of want this to not be perfect because it's less chance that the solder will reflow and cause gaps or pits. So this is great. I now need to file this end and this end to be perfect because those are going to meet up together. So I'm going to take my file and I'm going to file them as flat across as possible until you can't see the seam between the two layers. You see how that now looks like one piece of metal? That's what we want. And then you look at it and make sure that it's straight. If it's going up or down, if it's slanting up or down, try and fix that as best you can. It's gonna make your life easier. So I am filing the two ends that are gonna butt up against each other in my next forming stage. That's the only thing I'm filing right now. All right. This one is kind of going up at an angle, so I'm gonna try and fix that. Okay. All right, now it is ready for me to form it.